Morning, Trainiacs. Just cooking up my little post-workout shake. That was 3,200 meter swim in an hour and 4 minutes. Now that I am officially into the strength and speed building phase of the year, kick the workouts up a notch from like the 25 to 2,700 meter swims to a little over 3,000. And then in January, when we start getting into race season, because my race season starts early, we kick it up to around 4,000. Aquasizers are loud in the morning. All morning, every morning. One of the things that's come up over the course of the Trainiac virtual camps lately is how important Zone 2 training is. And people have said, well, how do I deal with Zone 2 when on the run my heart rate spikes higher? How do I deal with Zone 2 in the pool? Today, I'll explain like how to implement Zone 2 with the swim, the bike, the run, and what you can expect, because you're gonna have a bit of a rude awakening when you start doing Zone 2 training. By the way, Zone 2 training, probably the most important training you'll do. So, let's talk about Zone 2 training. I'll link to a couple videos that I've done in the past couple weeks about just how important Zone 2 training is. But to touch on it for like half a second, I'll explain how and what Zone 2 training is, how you can get it. All right, so this calculator here that I've created is a customized Taren's eyes created only, like my version of how to figure out your zones. It takes a little bit of some of the zones in running, a little bit of the zones in biking, a little bit of the zones in power and perceived exertion. And it takes it all in, makes it very, very practical to use, as opposed to a lot of those training zones that you get that are just templates online that say, oh, here's a percentage of your max heart rate, or here's a percentage of your heart rate based on your age, which really aren't very accurate. But this takes into account your individual FTP test, your max heart rate test, your level of medication or injury, or how hardy you've been in training, things like that. So it gets you a really narrow and specific set of zones, and we use a 5-zone heart rate system that is the same for the bike, the run, and the swim. And I'll explain more about that. You can get this by going to triathlontaren.com/HR training, but I've expanded it from heart rate to also include power. So go check it out. Okay, so speaking about Zone 2 training, it is where you do the bulk of your training. I guarantee that just about all of you are going to be spending more time in Zone 3. You don't want to do that. Zone 2 is just hard enough to create a cardiovascular response where your heart and lungs get stronger. You also burn a fair bit of fat because it's at a low intensity, but it's not so intense that you're digging yourself a hole, opening yourself up for illness and injury. Most people do most of their training in Zone 3 because it's really comfortable. It feels hard enough that it's like, oh, hey, I'm doing a whole bunch of work here, but it's not so hard that it's making you fast. So it's digging you into a hole, but it's not making you any faster. It's also not improving your cardiovascular system. So it's this gray zone is what it's called. Zone 2 is where you want to spend, like I say, about 40 to 50% of your time, somewhere around 20 to 30% of your time in Zone 1, and a total of 20% of your time in Zones 4 and 5, because those are really intense and they are fast enough to actually make you faster and stronger. So like I said, you can get this and all of this customization at triathlontaren.com/HR training. But when it comes down to actually doing the work, that's where I started getting a lot of questions over the course of this training camp. I'll explain. So as the Trainiacs from the virtual camp started doing some of the prescribed zone training, a bunch of questions came up. First off, how in the world do you run in zone 2? Most of the athletes weren't able to keep their heart rate low enough to actually stay in zone 2, and that's really, really natural. What we've done with that calculator is we've set the cap of zone 2 a little bit lower so that it actually is harder to keep your heart rate that low. And the reason for that is because running is so corrosive on the body that we want to be extra cautious and make sure that we aren't getting ourselves into that gray zone training, which is really hard on our muscles, our cardiovascular system, our neuromuscular system. So we back off a little bit with those customized zones. On the bike, it actually should become fairly easy to stay in zone 2. However, it's not going to feel very difficult. The first few times that you bike and run in zone 2, it's going to end up being fairly hard, especially on the run, to keep your heart rate under there. On the bike, if you start spending that 40 to 50% of your time in zone 2 really working on strengthening your heart and lungs, you are going to find that all of a sudden it starts becoming easier to access that low heart rate. And that's the whole benefit of this, is that right now, if you start running and all of a sudden, boom, your heart rate goes up to 150 beats a minute and you're really not even running that hard, that means that you have a ton of potential to improve because you aren't even able to access your low heart rate. You know, have you ever watched any of those Lionel Sanders training videos where he's like, oh my God, my heart rate was like 150 there? That's that low at his absolute crazy maximal efforts because his cardiovascular system is so well trained that he doesn't blow himself up and get into the red line very often, and he's accessing more of those lower heart rates. So it's important to stay in zone 2. However, for 4 to 5 weeks, it's going to take a quite long adjustment period that's not going to feel very intense. Here's how you can make it intense whether you're on the bike or the run. Number one, if you're on the run, you can end up playing cadence games. So it'll probably force you to slow your pace right down, but you can slow that pace down while trying to keep your cadence fairly high. Keep pushing that cadence up is probably going to shoot your heart rate up a little bit. That's okay. You can also then start nasal breathing. Nasal breathing, instead of mouth breathing, has really big cardiovascular benefits. I'll talk about that another time, but it is also going to make it hard. So maybe you do 3 minutes nasal breathing, 3 minutes mouth breathing with a low cadence, 3 minutes mouth breathing with a high cadence, and keep cycling those through. Whether you're on the bike or the run, it's going to break it up instead of just saying, all right, well, I'm gonna go do 80% of this 60-minute run for 48 minutes. I'm just gonna be in low zone 2 training. Super, super boring. But with this, it breaks it up and it keeps you mentally engaged because there's more things that you're working on and they are really beneficial things. What about on the swim? People say, well, should I stay in that 80-20 where 80% is at really low intensities in zone 1 and 2 and 20% is in the high intensity? Well, two things. One, because of the hydrostatic pressure, the water crushing essentially the outside of our body, it's hard for our heart rate to get high as it is. You can go and max out in some water running and your heart rate might only get to about, say, 140, 150 beats a minute. That is going to have a lower amount of stress on our body. Second thing is just in general, because there isn't so much pounding and there isn't so much corrosiveness on our body in the swim, we can up the intensity and not really worry about getting into those gray zones or those really difficult zones that are hard on our body. If you think about how often young elite swimmers are out there training, they're probably training 14, 15 times a week, and they're training really intensely, but it's not like it's overtraining them. Rarely do you see an overtrained swimmer. So don't necessarily worry about that 80-20 too terribly much on the swim. So stick to the 80-20, doing a good chunk of your training in zones 1 and 2 for the run and the bike. Also, play those games to break it up so it's mentally engaging. Don't worry too much about that 80-20 on the swim. And then what can you expect? Be patient. Somewhere around, I would say 4 to 5 weeks. If you are being patient, you are sticking to 80% of your efforts being at lower heart rates, you're gonna find very quickly, and this is the time to do it in the season, that your pace is going to increase at the same heart rates. At the same perceived exertions, your heart rates are going to be lower, which is then going to result in when you hit that 20%, it's gonna be bam, really fast because you've been fresh, not training in that gray zone that's just digging a hole for yourself. So that's going to then result in when you're trying to be fast, you are going to be much faster than if you had done a whole bunch of gray zone training. And that is going to allow you to get really fast. This is why you can see person after person after person racing year after year after year, doing all the training and not getting any faster, not really making any improvements, and even getting injured because they're doing a ton of their training in zone 3, not enough in zone 2, and when they want to go hard, they don't go very hard. So Trainiacs, if you want to get that spreadsheet, like I said, go to triathlontaren.com/HR training. Also, this is something that we talked about for probably 3 to 4 hours over the course of the virtual camp. So it's a really big topic. Let me know your questions about zone 2 and just zone training in general, how we balance that 80-20, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5, all of those things. Let me know about them in the comments below, and I'll probably have to do more videos. Later, Trainiacs.